All right, what's going on, guys? Dan Watson. And yes, I have been reading through your comments on the Sony A7IV review, which obviously if you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and pause this video, head over to that, come back here. And what's really interesting is that even though this is a pretty big update for Sony, it's definitely way more polarizing than the original A7 III was. I mean, I remember when I was at that release event, there wasn't a single person there that didn't think that was basically revolutionizing the full frame mirrorless camera space right there. And then here we are 3 years later and things are a little bit different. And we also have a 25% price hike, which kind of ups the standards a little bit. And even though there are some solid features here, there are a bunch of you calling out Sony for maybe even crippling the camera a little bit. So here it is. We're going to get into the no BS absolutely best and worst features with the Sony A7 IV. And if there's anything that I don't mention here, as always, guys, hit me up in the comments below. If you have any questions on the camera, we got a whole bunch more to get started. But yeah, this is the Sony A7 IV. So my first favorite improvement is definitely going to be hardware. And there's a bunch of things that are new here. And so you have a much larger grip on this camera. The overall feel of it is better. The buttons are larger, have a definitely more resounding press to them, a lot like Sony's newer cameras on here. You also have a full-size HDMI-A port, so that's a huge improvement. But my favorite is the fact that when you turn off the camera, the shutter can now close over the sensor and block out any dust from getting into the sensor, because I get dust on my sensor all the time when I'm changing lenses in the field. I know some of you don't like this. It's optional. You can turn it off in the menu, but I love it. And having the shutter over my sensor means I never have to worry about dust. If I had to pick my least favorite thing, it would be the shutter sound. It is very loud and kind of obnoxious. I mean, this is not really any different than the Sony A7 III was, but if you're someone who's used a lot of newer cameras, especially even Canon's R5 and R6, those shutters are so nice and quiet. And once you are using cameras like that, it's just kind of hard to go back to this kind of clunk. And it's definitely going to be something you notice a lot more, especially if you shoot a lot in quiet spaces like I do, weddings, events, concerts, anything like that. You'll definitely notice this a bit more. So the next big positive is going to be the upgrades that we've gotten to the screen and the viewfinder. Both have gotten resolution bumps, especially the viewfinder got a pretty big spec bump. Plus, you now have 120 frames per second on the viewfinder instead of previously where we only had 60. Now, the worst part of this screen, it really got such a minor resolution bump, it's almost unnoticeable, and it really is still one of the worst displays on the market in this kind of price range for a camera. On a $2,500 camera, I did expect more, especially from Sony. I mean, these guys make some of the best panels in the world, especially their phone Xperia. Sony needs to hire those engineers and bring them over to their camera division, because yes, on a camera like this, I expected a slightly better screen and we're just not getting it. Next best thing about the Sony A7 IV, customization. I mean, the customization on this is just incredible. There are things on this camera even the Sony A7S III doesn't have. Plus you have this brand new top dial, which really allows you to change between your menu settings really quick from photo to video to S&Q, but it allows 3 separate custom modes hardware. I mean, you don't have to go into any menus or software to access these. Plus, what used to be the exposure compensation dial is now basically another custom function dial, which you can set to ISO or white balance or so many other things. So the customization on this camera is just crazy. The negative, it is so complicated, it's not even funny. This is one of the more complicated camera systems, even more than the Sony A7S III, in a $2,500 camera that as a lot of people step up to their first mirrorless camera, or maybe even their first full frame camera. I do have a menu guide that should be available soon. If you don't see it yet, down below, go check back in a couple of days and hopefully we'll have it then, going over every aspect of this menu because it is very complicated. Working on it now, almost done with it, so stay tuned, guys, for that one. But if you want to be able to set up your own storefront on your website, maybe gallery features, all kinds of cool stuff, do what I did. Check out squarespace.com. It's completely free to get started. I've got a link down below and you can get started and build yourself a new website today. So obviously Squarespace makes it crazy easy to build a new site with templates, customizable blocks for adding in new content, and even the ability to search through thousands of images to help you get started. And there are just some insane tools for photographers and videographers, from custom galleries that allow you to password protect them for sharing privately with clients, and the ability to add in e-commerce to be able to sell your products online as well. I was able to upload my camera guides so I could sell them straight through my site in just a matter of minutes. There's also a full scheduling system, so you can actually have your clients sign up directly for their sessions online. So go ahead and check them out, guys. It's completely free to get started. Just use my coupon code LearningCameras when you build something awesome, and you can go live with that site today. So the next best thing is going to be frame rates, codecs, resolution, all of this combined. This camera has some of the more flexibility in these areas that I've ever seen. I mean, typically you'd have to go to high-end video cameras for this. So yeah, H.264, H.265, all I, 422 10-bit, 420 10-bit, 8-bit. You can choose between anything on this camera, and it's great. The negative, 1080p, for whatever reason, at 120 frames per second is going to be 8-bit only. So if you're somebody who likes to shoot that buttery, smooth, slow motion at 120 frames per second, I actually do it every so often, you will take a quality hit on this camera. Next best feature, 4K, oversampled from a 7K sensor, looks amazing. There's no way around this. Even low light looks amazing, which I'm really struggling to figure out how they pulled it off so well on this camera. But yes, the 4K video from this even blows away my A7S III in detail. It is amazing, second to none pretty much. It is absolutely great, and them being able to oversample that much is really kind of stunning. The negative, 4K 60 is now going to be an APS-C crop only, and that's kind of a big deal. Honestly, at first I thought maybe I could live with it. However, I shoot wide angle lenses a lot for things like receptions, real estate, my car videos, and now shooting 4K 60 with those wide angle lenses with a crop means that they're no longer that wide. And that's really a big deal for things like room shots and things like that, the dancing on the dance floors, the receptions. This is kind of a big deal for me if you're wedding, if you're real estate. There's so many different areas that this might affect you, and there is no 4K full frame 60 option. Even if it wasn't oversampled, it's just not here. So yeah, 4K up to 30 frames per second looks amazing with 7K oversampled, but having that crop mode might be a deal breaker for you. So next up is definitely going to be live streaming / USB-C tethering option. So this is now a webcam for your computer, and it's capable of 1080p up to 60 frames per second or 4K UHD at up to 15 frames per second. Just plug it into USB-C, a menu pops up, you can pick from your options on it. And so it is absolutely amazing for doing things like Zoom calls, live streaming to YouTube, and you can do all of this while recording simultaneously onto the camera, which is a very unique feature for something like this. Now, the worst thing about there's no worst thing. This is just a good feature overall. I make Zoom calls all the time. I'm looking forward to plugging this in and just having all of my feeds go straight to this camera. So yeah, this is overall just a positive feature. So next best is going to be the card arrangement on this. So you do get dual card slots for redundancy. They're both UHS-2, which is great. High-speed cards can be put in there, as well as this top slot can also be used with CF Express Type A, which is really cool in case you want a faster card or you just happen to have some of those lying around. The negative for me, so first of all, those CF Express Type A cards, they're almost impossible to get. They're extremely expensive. They're almost always sold out, and they're only available right now up to about 160 gigs, which is pretty small for a card for what I do. The other big negative is you might need to use that a little bit more than I first thought, and it's going to be for any kind of high-speed shooting. So unfortunately, the buffer on this camera is not that great when using the SD card. So I was only able to get probably about 20-25 frames tops when recording to high-speed SD cards, which isn't that good. However, when I did use a CF Express Type A card, I was getting hundreds of frames at compressed RAW, shooting 10 frames per second. So if you are somebody who needs a crazy buffer, the bad news is that you will probably need to also be picking up some of those CF Express Type A cards. So the next best thing is going to be kind of along those same lines. It's going to be the frame rate. So you actually get 10 frames per second at 33 megapixels, which I actually think is pretty good. I mean, sure, the Canon R6 gets you 12, I think, on that camera, but technically it's 50% less pixels on that, and it's not giving you 50% more frame rate. Now, the negative on this, and there's a couple actually. So the first one is that even if you switch from mechanical shutter to electronic shutter, Still only 10 frames per second. I don't know why. Most other cameras can shoot faster in electronic shutter, including the Canon R6, which goes to 20 frames per second in that mode. So there it starts to get that advantage for you. The other is that that's only going to be available when shooting compressed RAW or JPEG. So if you're shooting lossless compressed or actual uncompressed, you are going to be slowing down to about 6 frames per second. So in order to get that 10 frames per second, you just have some limitations with that. Next best thing on the camera is going to be features, and there are quite a few on this camera. For example, you have focus breathing compensation. So in video mode, if you're doing a rack focus and you have a lens that has focus breathing on it and what lens doesn't, the camera will actually crop slightly into the video. You don't notice it at all, but the camera will do the work for you in order to eliminate all focus breathing, and it works pretty well. I'm really happy we have this feature because I do focus pulls all the time when I'm doing especially wedding videography. Plus we have a variable shutter speed, so we can actually type in at basically any value, and this will help eliminate flicker, especially from video. Very useful for video tools. But yeah, you can help match the shutter speeds or flicker rates of the lighting around you. Plus, we have things like your image stabilization system, which can actually record gyro data straight to the card so that when you go into post, you can pull up Sony software and stabilize even better in post. However, my negative would be that we still don't have the option to record a medium or small RAW file. So you're stuck with 33 megapixels. And while I usually don't think that 33 is too big, when we're filling the buffer up in 10 to 20 frames, that is actually a big deal. So if you're using a SD card and you wanted to get more on the buffer and didn't mind sacrificing a little bit of resolution, maybe dropping down to 20 megapixels and shooting 50 images before you would fill up the buffer, that would be great. We can't do that. Most other cameras do it, and it's a pretty simple feature. Another amazing thing on this camera is going to be autofocus. I mean, the tracking on this is insane. The eye autofocus, it picks up the subject really far away and keeps that eye held incredibly well. It updates like crazy. It's one of the best autofocus systems I think we've seen on any camera. And even in video, you have all of those same features and the IAF and everything like that. So it's working extremely well, whether you're shooting photos or videos. The negative for me is actually when it involves getting multiple people into your frame. The camera really can track between different subjects and it doesn't really know which one to prioritize. It usually prioritizes an eye. So if you have multiple people in there, even if you selected one person, but another person's eye comes into focus, it will want to switch to that eye, especially if you can't maintain the eye on the first subject that you focused on. I do wish it was easier to switch subjects. I mean, Nikon has a feature where you can just use the joystick to move between eyes or to move between subjects. Sony doesn't really have this, so I end up either moving to a zone or a single point, so it would only look for a subject in a small area, or just turning IAF completely off and then just using the tracking feature to track a subject. So it works extremely well, but intuitively when you get multiple people in the frame, it could be a little bit better. But honestly guys, the images coming from this camera are really amazing. And even with the resolution bump, low light still looks incredible. Dynamic range is amazing. It's hard for me to really quantify. I don't have enough data on the actual sensor just yet. It is a brand new sensor, but man, I shoot with cameras like the R4 all the time, which are technically an upgrade, and the images coming from this just look amazing. The detail looks great. Dynamic range looks great. I'm really loving the colors on them. So overall, something that Sony is doing here just looks amazing. Even video compared to my A7S3, again, technically an upgrade in 4K 24, getting that 7K oversampled, having an APS-C option. There are some really cool things here, but definitely hit me up below if you guys have any questions on the camera, your thoughts, best, worst about it. I'm curious to see everything from that. I got a whole lot more coming with this camera, so you can check that out here. BTS, if you haven't followed me on IG yet, doing BTS of all my shoots and a whole bunch more over there, so go ahead and follow me, say hi over there. Hope you guys are doing amazing. Thanks for hanging out. Appreciate the like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you soon in a new video.